Whether you're looking for answers to specific life questions or seeking to become the best version of you possible, welcome to the Mental Breakdown and Psychreg podcast, where we offer insight, information, and strategies based upon research and years of practice as clinical psychologists. So sit back, have a listen, and get connected with our hosts, Dr. Berney Wilkinson and Dr. Richard Marshall. Welcome back. Richard, today we're going to talk about parenting because we found this great, it's a long-form article. Well, it's not real long. It's longer than a blog, I guess, but it's not quite as long as a article. I guess I don't know the difference between a blog and an article. I don't know what differentiates
No
them.
idea.
Maybe the author, if the author is paid or not. It's all right, Barry.
Barry
Barry White.
Barry White.
But
I'm going to sing later at the Holiday Inn in town. No, this is called The Parenting Trap.
Right.
And is this a blog? Did we decide?
I don't know. We didn't decide. But it's from the Association for Psychological Science. It's a
reputable organization.
Yeah, I think so. And it's talking about parenting from the perspective of a presenter who presented. It's been a couple of years, I think.
Right, 2016.
2016.
Right.
And at the APS annual convention in Chicago.
Right.
And it's Dr. Gopnik.
I think that's correct.
Gopnik?
I think it's Gopnik.
I got it. We didn't even practice beforehand, folks, so that's pretty good.
But she is a child development specialist.
Yes.
Right? Teaches at a university.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And she calls it an evolutionary look at childhood.
Right. Yeah.
She looks at childhood from an evolutionary standpoint. There's some controversy about how long our species has been on the planet.
Right.
Not our predecessors,
Yeah.
but our species. We know that, for example, that speech developed about 50,000 years ago.
Right.
Okay? But even if we go back 6,000 or 7,000 years ago, clearly there's written history about 4,000 years ago. Mm-hmm. So even if we go back to those years, the point that she makes in the article is that we are raising children differently today than any time in our evolutionary history.
Right.
Excuse me.
I think that the first line in this article is fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
You need some water.
I need something.
But the first line in this article is awesome because I had not heard this before, but she says, or the author says, the word parenting did not enter the popular lexicon until the 1950s.
Okay. And that's the stopper right there.
Right.
That's the showstopper
Right.
for me. Because as soon as I saw that line, it tweaked my interest and curiosity. But it also reminded me that the word teenager didn't appear until about the same time.
Right.
We had no concept of the teen years as being a specific we knew it was a stage of development, but the word teenager was actually developed by advertisers.
Right.
When we began to build large high schools, and suddenly said, wow, there's a whole group of kids here. It was a demographic that they could send ads to.
Right.
Okay. But the word teenager came at about the same time, I think in the 40s. And the word parenting as a verb appears in the 1950s.
Right.
So this whole concept of parenting is really, really recent.
Yeah.
And when you look at 4,000 or 5,000 years of human history, it's a significant departure.
Yeah.
And that's the point that she's making here.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And so the idea that a lot of these concepts are relatively recent.
Right.
You know, I think that most people who think about or even talk about parenting or try to, give their impressions about parenting and everything probably have no idea of what it was like prior to parenting being a verb.
My parents couldn't have gone into a bookstore or a library and had a parenting section.
Right.
Now there's a whole shelf after shelf after shelf of books on parenting. The concept didn't exist. When I think about how my mother, what about our grandparents?
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't.
So it's fascinating the recency of these ideas, and I love it the way that as we kind of go through some of the things today in this article and from her lecture, the idea that we really need to think about how we're thinking about this. We really need to think about how we're talking about it and how we're, what is parenting? What are we trying to accomplish with parenting? And are we really sort of being disillusioned that there is this particular way that we need to be doing it?
Our grandparents, when they had children, must have felt two obligations. One was to keep their children alive. Yes. This was in the days of polio and smallpox, chicken pox and different childhood diseases that we didn't quite have. I mean, you could die of pneumonia, right? In our grandparents' age, And so one of their jobs was to keep us alive. The second job was to keep their children clothed and fed, and in school for some number of years, 6th or 8th grade or 10th grade or something. And that was about it. And the kids, I think our grandparents sort of raised themselves. And maybe even our parents did. Yeah. They just sort of played outside, and there were no structured activities like we have today. Right. Gymnasiums and...
Well, but and depending on where they lived,
that's right.
Once they were, 8, 9, 10 years old, they were working.
That's right.
Because if they lived on farms and things like that, there was no other place for them to go except for out to work.
That's right. Or the Amish culture today. Right. What do? They keep their kids alive, and and then they work as soon as they can. They start working. Yeah. Okay. And so this really is a recent development. This whole notion of parenting by design. Right. Didn't appear until the 1950s.
Yeah. And so she has this great line. And if our IT department was just a little bit stronger, we would be able to pull this clip so that we could actually play it. Because
I'm containing myself.
The link in the show notes.
The IT department is sitting to my right.
The link in the show notes takes you to the article, but there's also an embedded video on that website of her talk.
I think it's. I just started to watch the beginning of it. It appears to be the talk that she did in Chicago, right? And it's about an hour long. Yeah. So, but it's well worth to invest an hour.
Yeah, but she has this great line, and again, if we had the time and resources, we kind of pull this clip, but instead you can read it.
I can?
Yeah.
I have to put on my glasses.
I know.
You don't like when I do that.
The reason I did that was because I saw you put your glasses down, and so I was like, well, now I'll ask him to read it.
I have it in 10-point font here, but the picture is that there's something parents can do, some kind of expertise they can acquire, some techniques they can learn, and if they just do the right thing, they'll end up having the right kinds of children, and then these children will become the right kinds of adults. Gopnik said during her Bring the Family address at this annual convention in Chicago. Yeah. The idea that you can, if you do the right things with your children, you will create the child that you want. Who does that make us think of? J.B. Watson.
We talked about that a couple of weeks ago. Let's see, our behavior therapy session was released. We did that on October 3rd. Right. We talked
this
about
month.
Behavior. This month we were talking about behaviorism, and we mentioned John Watson's. Sounds very similar to that.
Right. And that was
any kid.
Right. And that was way back in 1912, 1920.
Yeah, early 1900s.
Turn of the century, of the last century. And he said, I can use these techniques, and if you know the whole story, it didn't turn out so well with his own children. Right. So he said that he could, but in fact, it didn't work so well when he applied it to his own children. Yeah. But by the 1950s, this gets resurrected. So we have this baby boom generation just appearing, and this concept of parenting by design.
Yeah. Yeah. So Dr. Gopnik, she teaches at UCal Berkeley.
Right. She teaches at Berkeley.
Again, like as you said, she's a parenting expert, and she makes the argument that there isn't a right way. There isn't this formula that we can follow that's going to automatically or consistently result in the outcome that we want.
That's right.
That parenting is a little bit more complex than that,
Right.
but also requires, I almost want to say a little bit less planning. It's like you can't formulate it. It's just sort of overall what you do.
That's right. To me, what she's, I think, trying to say in this wonderful video and article is that children develop on their own. There's brain development, physical development, language development. And for all of this development to occur, children have to be nurtured, but there's a limit as to what parents can do
Right.
to change or aid or assist that development.
Right.
You can create the circumstances for development, but you probably can't engineer it.
Right.
You can't, the word now we use is micromanage.
Right. Right.
But what this woman is arguing is you can't micromanage that. The most you can do is to create the circumstances. And she said throughout human history, parents have created the circumstances for development.
Right.
Now we're trying to engineer development, and I think
Right.
that's where where the divergence occurs, is that should we be trying to engineer development?
Right.
She would argue no.
Right. So as we kind of go through what some of the things that was discussed in this paper or this article or blog, we still didn't decide what it is, there's a section called the evolution of childhood.
Right.
Right. And in that section, they talked about something that we've mentioned before, but does bear and necessitate sort of a revisit. And that is that as childhood for humans lasts much longer than childhood in just about any other animal.
In every species, right?
If we think about, whether we want to think about it legally, 18 years.
Right.
So if we want to think about it religiously, it's 12 years, right? About 12 years. Regardless of how we consider the boundaries of childhood, we're talking about years of development and exposure to adults who are to provide guidance and support and assistance and all of that. But we're talking about a very long
That's right.
portion of our life.
We live longer than most, and we develop more slowly than most. Think of a horse.
Yeah.
A horse is walking within minutes of its birth.
Right.
It takes us 12 months. The Kentucky Derby is run by horses that are 3 years old.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now horses only live until they're 30 or less, but we have a very long developmental phase.
Right.
We are altricial.
Oh.
Precocial is you develop quickly. Altricial is we develop slowly. So we are, as a species, we are altricial.
Yeah.
Sorry.
It's vocabulary time. No,
It's true.
Altricial. I don't know that
Like
word.
rats. Why do we do experiments on rats? Because a rat becomes a teenager in a couple of months.
Right.
They're born and they reach their teenage years within a few months. And so we can see developmental changes very quickly.
Right.
If you do experiments on humans, you'd have to wait 12 to 15 years.
Right. Yeah. So it does take a long time, and that, again, the part that I think that really needs to be revisited with that is that because it takes so much longer, there is much more exposure to parenting, as a verb, to parenting and to the influence of other adults and other people in our lives that help shape the way that we view and see the world and interact with others and manage relationships.
Yeah, we have these long developmental periods. If you think about it, you mentioned the age of 12. Okay, so you have this period from birth to age 12, and then you have the teenage years, and then you have the 20s. And so there are these decades, if you want, of development. Important things have to happen during each of those phases. Right. And that's the other thing she's arguing, is that from an evolutionary standpoint, there is a reason why development takes so long in humans.
Right.
And during each phase, certain things should happen.
Right.
And it may be very difficult to alter that.
Right.
And she's saying that as a species, we did it this way for 5,000 or 6,000 years. And then all of a sudden we're going to make this change.
Yeah.
And that change may not be to our benefit.
Right. Yeah, it's fascinating. And so she talks about the triple threat.
Yeah, right. And that's a major theme that we really ought to talk about. The first one is...
the first one is that from this evolutionary perspective, mothers are invested in the outcome of their offspring.
That's right.
And that, this shared involvement
right.
In raising children, it was really important because, a lot of times, again, evolutionarily speaking, a lot of times mothers didn't survive the birth,
right.
or, the mother would have other kids. There's other people that have to be taken care of. And so, the mother is really focused on strengthening and raising the child so that they can then move on to be able to do other things that they need to do and to be able to help and nurture the other people.
That's right.
around.
And in our species, monogamy seems to be more important.
Right.
More fundamentally important in our species than in other species.
Right.
Lions have a pride.
Right.
They have, one lion
Right.
has several lionesses. In our species, monogamy is much more important. And
Right.
so both parents are invested, get invested. And so one of the threats is you have two people, especially if you have a single, an only child, and you have these two adults
Right.
who... We do it anyway. We do it as it's one of our inherited traits is we take care of our young. So now you have these two adults focused completely on this one individual or even two individuals. Now, if you have 6 or 7 kids, you start to dilute the parental influence. But one of the threats is parents will invest heavily in the development of their children. So that's one threat.
Yeah.
Okay. Second threat is?
The second part of the triple threat has to do with the extra generations, the presence of grandmothers. And so not only do we have the two parents, but now we have the influence of this extended family of grandparents, especially grandmothers, in the development and raising.
Because they were present.
Right.
The only two species that have grandmothers who do this are ours and killer whales, as it turns out.
Orcas.
Orcas, right. And my parents both knew their grandparents because they were part of the extended family. It's not that they lived together, but they lived near enough that grandparents functioned almost as surrogate parents. Okay, and so that's another unique feature of our species, that here you have more than you already have two parents, but now you have more than two who are going to invest in this child. Yep.
So then the third part of the triple threat is that we have sort of developed as it says here, we have developed to ensure the survival and growth of human offspring and strengthen their future adaptation because of the availability of alloparents.
That's a new word.
So we have, and so what this triple threat is, it offers us an insight into the number of influences, adult influences, on the development of a child. And and we're moving outward. So we have the parents, we have the extended family or grandparents, and now we have alloparents. And that's where we get the idea of it takes a village.
Right. And these alloparents, one of the things that she says
non-relative caregivers.
They're non-relative who were around and they helped raise the children. Now, what she says about that is these might have been older siblings or cousins or friends or people lived more closely together. And she said that typically young children would learn how to raise children because they were exposed to them.
Right.
What's happening today, and so you would learn how to nurture children because you were raising children essentially most of your life. What's happening today is you don't have alloparents. People go to school, go to college, and you're not exposed to raising young children. And so your mindset is, well, I'll approach child rearing the way I approach everything else. I'll take a course, I'll get books, I'll look it up on the internet, and I will, just like I took my college classes, just like I learned how to cook.
Right.
You know, I wanted to learn how to cook, so I took cooking classes, and I bought books, and I watched videos,
Right.
and mastered this this art of cooking.
Right.
They approach child rearing the same way, not from experience,
Right.
but from learning what techniques they need to use, and then applying them as though they're learning some new skill called parenting.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. So we're gonna get to and kind of dig into that idea of goal-centered parenting here in just a second. But I think first, I think that should really something that really should be emphasized about this triple threat is that that was the influence in the way things have been done for a long time,
thousands of years. Yeah.
And that is changing.
Right.
And that is, we have more single parents now. So we have now removed one half of that first part.
The first
of
threat.
And then the second, as we go to the second part, sometimes we, because the world is getting smaller, we move away. And, so we don't have the influence and the connection with extended families. I mean, I know there's a lot of families that I work with who live in this area, and their nearest relative lives two states away.
Especially here in Florida, which is a migratory state. People come here, and frequently they don't have family connections. Right. Many people live in Florida, don't have any family connections.
Yeah, and then of course the issue with the allo parents is we all know it's pretty openly discussed that we no longer live in a world where we are caring for each other.
That's right.
Instead, we want to demonize others, if anything. Stay away from those people. Don't go. Don't go talk to your neighbors. What are you doing?
Right.
And so this shift has really changed the way in which we're raising kids, and it's changing the dynamics. And I think that maybe it's a little bit of a chicken or egg type of thing. Did we become more goal-centered, goal-oriented with our parenting because we started losing those other resources? Or did we start eliminating those other resources because we became more goal-centered, goal-oriented? I'm not sure which came first.
Right. No, but there has been this sea change. There's been this enormous change, and how we have raised children for thousands of years has changed, and now it's become a skill to learn, and to practice, and so we. But the effect of that, no matter how tempting it might be to engineer your children, what do they call it? Reverse engineering?
Right.
No, this is what I want, so I'm going to reverse engineer it. This is what I want my adult to look like. And so we're going to reverse engineer this thing. So I have to go back and say, okay, this is what I'm going to do to this infant to create this model.
What that reminds me of, and man, I should have pulled that article, and I don't remember it now, or remember where it was. But remember the article that we reviewed months ago, where a guy wrote it whose son got into medical school, and he wrote, this is how to get your kid into medical school.
Right.
And it was basically reverse engineering. His kid got into medical school and he was like, oh man, I really must have done a really good job. So let me go back and look at all the things that I did to make sure that my kid got into medical school. And it's those, but I don't know that it really had to do with that. But it's this idea that there's a recipe, there's a formula, and if you just follow the formula, everything's going to work out great.
It's a very seductive, very tempting.
Absolutely.
Because what we do is we say, well, if I want my child to go to an Ivy League college, that I want my child to go to college. But that's usually not the goal. I want my child to go to the best college.
Right.
So my child has the most advantages.
Yeah.
Okay? If I want him to go there, then he has to go to the best high school.
Right.
And when he goes to high school, he has to get all A's.
Right.
And then to accomplish that, he has to go to a certain middle school and get all A's.
Right.
And on down the line until you get to what's the best daycare center.
Right.
How do I get my child ready for the best kindergarten? In places like New York and Atlanta, Chicago, Parents spend tens of thousands of dollars for the right kindergarten, and they spend thousands of dollars getting their children ready to take the test for that kindergarten.
Yeah.
It's a cottage industry in New York.
A test for kindergarten.
Right, to get into the right kindergarten. And those people vie for those positions, and they compete for them. And so in some cities, this has been raised, it's at a frenetic pace to get your kids into the right kindergarten. So we understand the temptation. We understand the parental desire to make this happen. But in doing that, in engineering each activity or each year or what each report card is going to look like, we rob our children of one of the most important aspects of their development. And that's what she's concerned with.
Right.
So I'm not sure that she's saying don't do this.
Right.
Because I think that most parents are going to be invested in their children.
Right.
But she's saying be careful how you do it because you are removing something from your child's life that he or she may need to fully develop.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And so another line that is in here, it says, she says, for the first time, there were people who had children after spending many years working and or going to school, but not taking care of kids.
Right.
So, and I think that lends to this idea that it's so seductive and attractive to say, if I just buy this book, this handbook for raising an emotionally healthy child. What?
Whoa.
But if I just buy this book,
full disclosure,
then I will know everything what to do.
That's right.
Because I've gone to school, I've been working, and I haven't raised any children. I haven't been around any kids for a couple of decades now. But I really want to have kids, and so I just need this experience. I mean, up until maybe the 1950s or so, women, families, couples tended to have children right out of high school,
very early.
By their early 20s, they had all the children that they were going to have.
My grandmother had 10 before she was 25. She had her first when she was 14. She was done having babies by 25.
No matter what your age, if you have 10 kids, you should be done.
Only 7 survived, but in those days, childbirth was a dangerous business, and so 7 survived. But we all had large families. These are Catholic families, and they had large families.
Yeah,
they weren't allowed to use any
birth control. But they lived on a farm, right?
They lived in a small village. Where they could do some farming.
Yeah. So you had to have kids just to.
They just had kids.
Work.
They were big families.
Yeah.
And they sort of took care of each other. But yeah, what people are doing now is they're not learning how to be parents. They're studying how to be parents.
Right.
They're getting this wisdom from books and YouTube and other videos.
You know what I think is a great example of this is the difference when you have new parents. The difference between the way they manage their first child and their third child. Their first child, everything is clean, sterilized, everything. By the time the third child comes along, they're picking the pacifier up off the floor, just kind of blowing it off and give it. Yeah, it's fine.
Lick the dirt off the pacifier and give it to your kid.
That's the difference here, right? The difference is that it has to be sterile and clean and everything has to be perfect. Versus the reality is that kids lick the floor. It's like
they're playing on the floor all day and they're putting their hands in their mouths.
Right. And so we get so caught up in some of these things. And so when we're trying to parent in this pristine environment or with this pristine perspective, I think there's a lot of flaws.
I think that's an absolutely appropriate point to make. We have a hand sanitizer now, and you can have hand sanitizer all over the house.
Right.
And you're squirting your baby's hands
constantly.
Okay, you can try to create this quasi-sterile environment, but what is the unintended consequence of that?
Yeah.
Your child doesn't develop immunities, and they're prone to all these illnesses because you're denying them the opportunity to develop a hardy immune system.
So what happens at the beginning of every school year? They miss a couple of days because they get sick.
Right.
you know, because then they get exposed to...
Let them eat dirt. Let them roll around on the floor. That's how they're going to develop their
Yeah.
immunities. I mean, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I
So,
mean,
I love
when you
watching...
think about how children lived for years, I mean, they lived in dwellings that had dirt floors.
Right.
With bugs and creatures, and the animals lived in the same...
You said creatures. Bugs and creatures.
things
Yeah,
that live in the dirt.
Yeah.
And they would eat those. I mean, but that's how you develop a robust immune system,
Right.
is by exposing your body in small doses to these things.
Yeah, yeah. That always reminds me, I won't go into a lot of detail, but I remember early on when I was working with you, you would eat like sandwiches that had been in your car all day with like, even with mayonnaise on it and everything, and you would like, I was like, Richard, that's like awful. And you would eat it anyways. You said, I'm just building up my immune system.
It's good for your immune system. Look at how good I look at 92. I mean, the mayonnaise worked, right?
92.
No, my people are so fussy about food. You
Yeah.
know, my kids could survive anywhere because you leave food out for a couple of days and still eat. We have violated every rule.
Just brush that.
Cut the green stuff off and eat it anyway. And it appalls other people, you know, my mother and other family members. But like I say, look
Like
at me. At
everybody
90.
else.
That's right.
Not just...
But this is important because the rest of this article, she says the reason that children have this slow maturation,
Right.
is that they have to go. It takes a long time for them to acquire the skills that they're going to need to live this very long life,
Right.
and to raise their own children, and to have a partner, and to educate. So we have this very long lifespan, and it takes a long time and a lot of skills. You know, most species have a very limited repertoire. They have to learn about 3 or 4 things. You know, feral cats need to learn how to hunt and reproduce.
Right.
Okay, both of which they do instinctively. We have a large, and enormous repertoire of behaviors that we have to learn. Okay, so it takes longer. And what she's saying is that the process of take a child from birth to puberty. Okay, there are so many things that they have to learn at that time to get ready for puberty and adulthood. And the way you learn it is by experimenting.
Right.
Okay? The child learns through experience. Piaget told us this,
Yes.
the great Swiss, was actually a zoologist, but he said he referred to children as little scientists.
Yes.
They're always experimenting with their world to figure out how things work. And what this woman is saying is that we have to give children that opportunity to experiment with their world, because that's how they're going to learn things.
Yeah.
And one of the most important ways, surest ways to learn something is by making mistakes.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
And if you're engineering your children so that they don't make mistakes, once again, just like you deny them the opportunity to develop an immune system, you can also deny them the opportunity for any kind of development.
Yeah. Yeah. I like this entire section
Yeah.
on that they call the Bayesian.
Bayesian. Yeah, Bayesian. Did you have to study that when you were in? It appeared in the late 80s and early 90s in grad. It was just introduced. The guy's name is Bayes, B-A-Y-E-S. And it's a statistical modeling procedure that I never understood.
Yeah.
I mean, it was brand new when we learned it, and most of us never really understood it. It's used in test development too, but beyond my pay grade.
Well, they talk about it a little bit here, but she mentions in her talk, she mentions just that. She says the young children are actually better at finding something unusual or unlikely, better at solving problems than the older children are.
That's right.
And or even the adults.
Right.
So she's talking about how this exploration,
right.
this the fact that kids are little scientists, and we have to let them go out and problem solve and figure out how to do things without the immediate involvement of the adults and parents.
Right. Children are going to explore their world.
Right.
Our role as a parent is to keep them alive.
Right.
They are going to do things that could be potentially dangerous. I mean, yes, it would be problematic to put a child on a table and for that child to explore what would happen if she crawled off, or ate something dangerous.
But I think that even that is a fantastic example, because what do we know from the cliff experiments?
That's right.
we know that kids, even as before they can even walk, they are able to see that depth perception, and they will look over and they won't just jump off.
They might fall off accidentally,
right?
But they're not going to crawl off a table.
Yeah,
they may lose their balance, but when they look at it, even very young infants, they're going to know not to do it.
Yeah.
Okay. There's something in it. So
there's some videos of that on YouTube.
They're wonderful.
That are fantastic.
Right.
Because you can see these. They put a glass over the little cliff, and so they can't really fall. But
kid puts his hand down. Whoa!
Yeah.
Why not do that?
Yeah.
So they have this innate sense. Okay. And if we just let them explore, they'll eventually learn it. Now, if they pick up a Cheerio on the floor and eat it, that's okay. If they pick up a pill, okay. So our job as a parent is to make sure that they have a safe environment to explore, and that they don't do anything that could be harmful.
Right.
But let them develop. Let them make mistakes.
Right.
From birth to 5, from 5 to 10, from 10 to 15, give your children the opportunity to learn these things on their own.
Right. Yeah. So, should we get to the moral of the story?
I could talk about this for the rest of the morning.
I know you could.
I'm getting fired up now. It's your fault.
See about that.
No, I'm telling you. You know, I have to settle down. What I like about this is we know that we're going to do as much as we can for our children.
Right.
And give them every advantage we can afford.
Right.
We know all that. But somewhere in this process of parenting, you have to build in, you also have to engineer some failure.
Right.
Kids they're going to learn through their mistakes. We all learn more from our mistakes than we do from our successes.
Right.
We all learn more from our failures than our triumphs.
Yeah.
You have to allow your children the opportunity to make a mistake. Right. I think the worst thing you can do for a child is to give them the feeling that all they have to do is follow this recipe of success after success after success, and that the result will be success.
Right.
That hasn't happened.
Right.
There's another article we did, I think we did it this past week, about putting so much emphasis on academic development, on academic success, that we're ignoring other developmental, other aspects of kids' development. Right. So they truncated social skills, and they don't know how to handle disappointment. Right. They don't know how to handle failure. They don't know how to do things for themselves because everything has been engineered. Right. I think it was one of the talks we did this week. I'll have to go back and look at them. But we put this emphasis on academic development because what are most parents? Most parents are stressing athletic development and academic development. Right. I mean, that's where we're putting all of our energy. But yet there's all these other developmental skills that we need to acquire, and we're denying kids the opportunity to learn those.
Yeah, absolutely. So the moral of the story.
Yes.
Back to the moral of the story. The moral of the story is that there is not a correct way.
No.
There are many paths to Oz. Right. There are many ways to get to your ultimate destination. Right. There are traditional paths, there are non-traditional paths, there are easy paths, there are more challenging paths, but you know the overall the overall reality is that there are many ways to get where you're trying to go into, you know, for your kids to be able to find success. And because they didn't get into that perfect kindergarten, or because they failed that algebra test, or because they, you know, didn't get into that, you know, their first choice college or something like that, does not necessarily mean in any way that they are not going to be able to accomplish what they need to accomplish, that they are going to become what it is that they hope to become. Instead, we need to think as parents, we're developing a person. We're not developing a doctor. We're not developing an attorney.
That's right.
We're developing a person, and that person has to be multifaceted. That person has to have skills in a broad range of areas. And when we spend so much time trying to engineer and to focus and to ensure that their development in one particular area is perfect, is you know, meets some expectation, meets some level, we are automatically, I mean, it's impossible not to then neglect lots and lots of other areas.
That's right. Go ahead and nurture your child in the academic areas, but don't do it at the expense of everything else. Okay? Yeah. That's not going to end up the way you want it to end up.
Right.
David and Goliath. can't remember his name, the author. But in David and Goliath, he talks about...
Wait, are you talking about from the Bible?
No.
Or are you talking about Malcolm Gladwell?
Malcolm Gladwell.
Okay.
The book that Malcolm...
I was going to say, I think it was Abraham. That may have... But it was Malcolm Gladwell. Was it Abraham?
And he talks in that book about the young woman who went to Brown University, got into Brown, a successful student, and absolutely fell apart.
Yeah.
Because while at Brown, she got a B+.
Yeah.
And he said she would have been much better off going to an excellent state university, and that would have been her path to success.
Right.
So she was able to get into Brown, but she didn't have the resources to handle it because everything else had been ignored.
Right.
It had been engineered so that she would always get an A. When she didn't get an A, she didn't fail.
Right.
She got a B.
Yeah.
And she did not know how to handle that.
Yeah.
She was ill-equipped,
Yeah.
fell apart, and gave up her dream.
Yeah.
But she was completely capable of achieving. But
Yeah.
she gave it up because she fell short of some...
She was completely capable of achieving academically.
That's right. That's right.
Not socially, emotionally.
Right. She could have become a doctor or a scientist or whatever. She had the intellectual ability and the educational background to do it.
Yeah.
But she didn't have the personal resources that she needed to handle it.
Yeah.
And that's what we have to remember, that there's a whole child. We're not raising doctors. We're raising people
Right.
who might become doctors
Right.
or teachers or engineers or quarterbacks.
Yeah. And we've met those doctors who don't have the social emotional development to...
And we've met many millennials who were raised this way, and they get to their 20s and they're not sure what to do now.
Right.
That it's not being engineered anymore. Because once you leave the university, once you leave the academic setting, there isn't a semester by semester path to follow.
Yeah.
You have to know. You have to have other skills.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, all right.
So this is worth your time.
Yeah. So,
Check the video out. If you're doing something, just plug it in and watch it while you're doing something this weekend or next week. Listen
it'll
to
be great. It's really good. And just think about this a little bit as you're thinking about how you're going to respond to your kids. Report cards come out soon, so think about that as the report cards are coming out.
Yeah, design your house for all the things that kids need to do.
Absolutely.
Design your lives for everything, not just academics.
Absolutely. So, all right, that is it for today.
It's good talking to everybody again.
Yeah.
It's nice seeing you, by the way. I like the shirt. Is that new?
No?
It's nice. You look nice today.
You see that?
And what day is it?
Until next time.
We always have 2 days. Now, we have the real day, and then we have the video day.
Well, we're recording this on Friday, and it just goes out on Sunday.
Because I'm never sure what to say. You see, because I've made that mistake many times. I say, well, this is... And they say... And then afterwards, I always say, remember that this is not Friday, it's really Saturday. So...
This is an example. I'm working really hard to raise the entire person, not just the great psychologist.
And don't criticize my grandmother.
I didn't criticize your grandmother.
Probably too many kids.
10 kids is a lot of kids.
She had 10 pregnancies. She had 7 survived. But she got married when she was 13. Well, she didn't have to get married. The reason she had to get married is they lived in a dangerous area. And so for her own protection, her parents decided to get her married to protect her safety. It's another story we can talk about some other time.
In our next therapy session.
But she was...
Let's talk about your grandmother a little bit. It's okay. All right. Until next time. I don't know. We could just keep going like this forever. So until next time, stay happy, stay healthy, and forget to be afraid.